Hi, welcome to the Ellis Talker Show. I'm DV LeBron. Do you have any contracting needs, anything that a roof that needs to be done? Check out K&H. They're a local company, homebred, Waxahachie bred, Mr. Chris Helms, and check them out and let them know I sent you. Today, my very special guest is Mr. Kevin Crouch, who you guys have probably seen if you looked on when you had weather events locally. I know that when there is tornadoes or not tornadoes or any weather events going on here, Kevin is on every screen in my house and my phones. Thanks for coming on the show, buddy.
Anytime, man. It's good to be with you. I'll have to ask your followers, your viewers, to excuse my froggy voice a little bit. We were just talking about how harsh the man cold can be, and it has got its stranglehold on me. But we're going to get through it. We're going to have a great conversation.
I'm pretty sure. I mean, the man code is real, folks. I know you men know it. But I wanted to have you on, and we kind of talked about this before about the sensationalism of weather and kind of predicting the weather here in Texas and that stuff. So I definitely kind of wanted to have you on as an expert to talk about those things. But first, I wanted to kind of just ask you about how does your day start with getting this information out?
So yeah, I mean, first thing in the morning, I'm jumping in and looking at. I look at the forecast as I had it yesterday, right, to kind of orient myself on. Here's baseline. Here's what I'm looking at. I look at some other sources, National Weather Service, kind of see what their thinking has done overnight because I'm asleep overnight, but the National Weather Service, they're around the clock. And so they may have seen updates overnight that I didn't see. There's a few other meteorologists that sometimes I'll check their thinking because meteorology is a science. And peer review, I think, is a part of that. And so I'm not ashamed to say that, hey, there's a few guys that I like to check their thinking and see if there's something that they've seen that maybe I haven't. There was one morning where I woke up and found out that a cold front had arrived 4 hours early. I don't recall exactly how we ended up getting the timing so messed up on that. I think it was probably just a case of, it hit some tailwinds or you just kind of hit a flow just right or a pattern just right and dove right in. And so I was, working on my forecast while everybody else was kind of adjusting theirs because it's a chain reaction. And so this front arriving 4 hours early was going to change the afternoon high, and that was going to change the overnight low. So I sat back and, one of my friends up in Dallas, I said, I'm going to let you figure out your forecast, and I'm just going to cheat off yours because as I was working, they were changing theirs, and I'm like, okay, clearly we're in a transition point where I'm sitting now, and it was wild. But I start with the 7-day forecast because that's the first thing people want, right? Just tell me what the weather's going to do today, the next few days. And that sets in my head the right tone for the rest of the day. That tells me what are people going to be talking about? What is the focus going to be? What are people going to see in that forecast that they're going to have questions about or they're going to be wondering about? So that kind of sets the pace for the rest of the day. If there's a chance of storms coming up, if it's summer and there's a chance of a cold front coming up, then obviously people are going to be curious about that. So I get the 7-day forecast out, and then the rest of the day is just kind of honing in on those weather stories, if you will, that people are going to be more concerned with and trying to get out content, graphics, and that kind of thing to provide more information on them.
Talk to me about weather technology, some of the things that you've gotten that's helped you kind of navigate weather in Texas.
Well, I mean, we've shown a lot of models the last few weeks here with all of the different winter storms and things going through. So that's part of it, accessing through Radar Omega or Pivotal Weather, those kind of things. Obviously, when it comes to the cameras and the audio and things, I have to make sure that I'm on the best possible plane there, getting a clear, concise message. Here just recently, you've usually seen me on the green screen, which is put away right now, but you usually see me on the green screen during severe weather events. But now I'm actually changing that a little bit. I'm getting back to the desk where I was, and I've got a layout like a lot of these streamers do when they're sitting at a desk and doing these things like you've got on this. And you can still clearly see the radar, but the trouble I was having was that I was trying too much to go with what I had idealized in my head, but it wasn't efficient and ineffective because when I'm sitting at the desk, I have much more control over the radar and the different tools. I'm right next to multiple screens, so I have different sources of information. And sometimes these live streams are going 3-4 hours long. And so I'm, wearing myself out and fatiguing myself unnecessarily in front of the green screen while I'm trying to control everything on the computers while up there. So it was just too much going on. I was stretching myself too thin, and it was kind of degrading the product. So I'll still be doing the forecast videos and those kind of things in front of the green screen, but it's all about, I one of the things with me is I'm never comfortable. I always want to know, what can I do better? What's the next thing? And that can be stressful. It can wear you out if you let that take over. But to
Mhm.
me, I always want to see how I can improve. And so, I mean, obviously, I have a weather station that can tell me how much rain we're getting, that kind of thing. That was really helpful during a stream recently where we had flooding rains. So I was able to actually talk about those rain rates increasing while I had that rain gauge updating in real time. And, I have an earpiece in my ear. I've got a buddy that helps with the moderation. Sometimes he even sees things on radar. If I'm looking in one area, he says, "Hey, make sure you check this out over here." So he kind of helps to be an extra set of eyes. So I am the kind of person that I don't normally like sensory overload, but somehow or another, I'm able to make it through these live streams when I've got so many different sources of information, so many things happening, and it can be a lot.
When you're a small content creator and you've gotten pretty large, but just in general, when you're running an operation like this, you don't have the producers, the different things that you might see at a station that, they have all kinds of gizmos and gadgets and people doing, there's a lot that people do around them that you don't see. We don't have that when you're smaller. We got to kind of do it ourselves. But I wanted what it I know that you were talking about the 7-day forecast. One of the biggest things that I've seen here is that you'll have this 10-15 day month out thing, and they have a European model, a New Zealand model, an American model. They got about 1 billion models. So tell me
Yeah.
about models and what is the difficulties of predicting weather out.
So, especially talking about winter and the fact that, we've had two winter events that were very different from each other in terms of forecasting challenges. So, the one we were watching a week ago, which was the one that, you hear everybody talking about, are they going to close school for rain? I think I've heard that joke about 600 times at this point. But we were kind of right on that freezing line. And so in the winter, it can be really challenging because 1 or 2 degrees can be all the difference in terms of your forecast. So that's why some of those winter storms are very tough to forecast. And the models were all over the place. I mean, there's a lot of debate you'll see on social media of this model's better and this model's better and this one. The thing is, you don't stick with one or two. The way you do it, and Steve McCauley, if you go on YouTube, he has a segment on this. You look at multiple models. You look to see it's statistics. You look to see where's the consensus. So if you have, there's 5 or 6 models that I look at regularly, and if 5 of those 6 are showing pretty much the same thing, and then you got one over here that's just completely off its rocker, that's an outlier. Again, it's statistics. So that's a statistical outlier. You look at the others and say, this is a much more likely situation to occur. And then what happened in this last event was they just kept, they'd all start coming together. Then you'd have one or two that would just jump ship, and it would kind of throw everything off because you had a pretty good idea, but then you're thinking, well, is this model onto something? Because there were different points where each model seemed like they were kind of going maybe in a better direction. So it wasn't one of these situations where one model won over the other. They were all just back and forth. The one just a few days ago that brought all this storm, that brought all the snow to Houston and to the coast, the models were all right in line with each other. I mean, it was just nuts. They were all in line and they all looked almost identical. And sometimes you get that. Sometimes they're pretty clear. Now, I will say, I think we got more snow in parts of this area than we expected. Certainly, when I was outside of the studio getting some video and photos of that snow, I was impressed by how much we got. And a part of that, too, is that when you have to manage expectations, because for one, you can be honest, but people want to know what's going to happen. Am I going to get what I want or not? There's so much emotion in winter weather here in Texas that sometimes you gotta kind of figure out, how do I let them down easy, right? We've
Yeah.
been looking at chances of snow, and doesn't look like much is going to happen. So, I mean, there's a lot that goes into kind of the messaging aspect of it. And the 7-day forecast, there was people that in that storm about a week or so ago were making it a point to be very vague in their forecast. And some of them would literally say, we'll worry about that later. Okay, I get the rationale on that because it was still unclear. But at the same time, if you're going to put 7 days in a forecast, tell me what you think about all 7 of them. And that's why some people, told me that I shouldn't have put snow in the forecast that early. But there were other people that they wanted to, but they were trying to, again, manage that expectations game and just put a 30% chance, but put no logo there. So they were trying to put something there, but not commit to it. And to me, I'm going to tell you that 3 days out is usually a pretty good bet. 5 days is subject to change. 7 days, you're largely looking at trends. And people have, the Monday morning quarterbacking, of course, is always fun. But I've had people say, well, why don't we cover ice situations or snow situations like severe weather? Just cover it as it's happening, right? So that there's not this uncertainty earlier in the forecast. So let's play that out. And 2 things are going to happen. One, you're going to have people, there are planners out there. Not all of us are shoot from the hip. We just do whatever's going on at the time. Some of us got to plan 5, 6, 7 days out, right? And if I put that in the forecast 7 days out, people can go, okay, well, it's not a guarantee, but I can have that in the back of my head. I can think of an indoor alternative to an outdoor event or something like that. If we were to handle those ice and snow situations like severe weather and cover them as they're happening, you talk about the school cancellations. If we play that out, you're going to have parents, you're going to have schools closing school as roads are freezing. And you're going to have parents running out to pick up their kids as the roads are freezing. So you have every parent in town and buses out on icing roads at that point. It just doesn't work. Now, obviously, these people that are doing 10-day, 15-day, in the case of AccuWeather, 45-day forecasts and these kinds of things, yeah, you're stretching at that point. In some cases, really stretching. And there are a lot of people on social media, and you've seen plenty of them, where they'll post a graphic of one model, and they oftentimes, and there's a page that's actually literally dedicated to this because I followed their content for a few days, they'll find the most dramatic model they can and post that. They don't post the others. They post so usually they're finding the outlier and telling you about it, which to me is just intellectual dishonesty, right? And there's so much more context that's actually going to communicate what's going on. I mean, doing the 7-day forecast, it can be tough to kind of make a determination of, hey, I'm going to write my name on this, sign my name to this, and put it out there. And this is my take on what's going to happen. And, yeah, I mean, some people are happy about it. Some people not at all.
Now there's situations where you hear polar vortex and weather. I can't say the other word that goes with it because they'll Facebook will get you, but there's a weather with a B, and there's words like that. And what is a polar vortex? But I also want you to talk about why is it so hard to tell weather in Texas compared to other places, because a 7-day forecast in California, you can pretty much plan everything behind it. A 7-day forecast in Texas, God help you. Why is there such a difference?
I mean, there's times in Texas where 24 hours out, I'm still scratching my head, trying to figure out what this thing's going to do. And one is that, especially in the winter, the variables are so sensitive, right? And that's what I'm talking about, where 1 or 2 degrees can make a difference. So the polar vortex, and I was banging my head against the wall a couple of weeks ago because I saw multiple news outlets and primarily newspapers misusing the term polar vortex. So the polar vortex is a vortex in the upper levels. It is a rotating, column of air, not a column of air, but it's rotating air in the upper levels that essentially holds Arctic air where it is up in the Arctic Circle. Now, what can happen, and this happened in 2021, right? This was, part of that massive freeze, is you can see distortions of that polar vortex where it will expand southward, or even sometimes it'll just kind of wobble, right? And the polar jet stream is really the part that usually gets us, because the polar jet stream is or the Arctic jet stream, there's a few names for it. That's what usually holds the cold air north of us, right? We usually have the tropical jet stream. The tropical jet stream is what brings all the storm systems from California and the desert Southwest through Texas, and then they go on through. So that's normally what we have here. When that tropical jet is stuck up north of us in the summer, we don't get any rain because all of those storm systems are going north of us. We have that high pressure dome that holds that north. So in the winter, when we're colder and the earth is tilted away from the sun, then that allows that colder air to dip a little farther south. And when you have those distortions in the polar vortex, like we're seeing in the eastern US right now, that's going to allow that polar jet stream to dip down as well. And when that gets south of us, that allows that Arctic air to move in. That's what we've had the last several days. So it's a part of your weather, but a polar vortex is not like a storm system where it comes through and it comes in and passes on. The polar vortex is pretty stationary for the most part. I mean, like I said, you have those distortions, but it generally stays up there. It's a pretty consistent phenomenon up around the pole. And so to say that a polar vortex is coming through is not always accurate. It can affect your forecast, but you have to make sure that you have those terminology misconceptions in mind when you're communicating weather, because I just think that it's intellectually honest to use the right terminology and to educate your audience so that they know what's going on and have a better understanding of what to expect.
I want to ask you about something that I've seen you in the comments of your live streams get hit with this. Well, my WAP says that this is that. I don't know what you're talking about, because my WAP says, and this last, when we were supposed to have snow and all this stuff that was supposed to happen, closing down schools, etc. The WAP was literally telling me that it was snowing. I had on the radar, it was showing snow on the radar, like here, completely covered snow. There was nothing going on out there. Or at least when I walked out there was nothing hitting me. So tell me, how do these WAP or WAP, and there's different ones, how do those things operate, and are they really that accurate?
So these apps are automated. No human being could spend 24 hours every day, or even in shifts, constantly updating that hourly forecast that you get, right? That's what a lot of people talk about. And you have these apps that tell you it's going to rain at 6:13 p.m. Okay, and it doesn't mean they can't be right from time to time. Broken clock is right twice a day. But the reason that these apps change so constantly, and I've had people ask me, why is my app just bouncing around with these forecasts? Well, the reason for that is that it's automated. It's calculating these apps, or these models rather, and it's changing as each model changes. So essentially, it's almost like the last thing it sees is the forecast, right? So it's going to change its calculus every so often. You don't have a human being with experience with these apps looking at it going, okay, that's significant enough, I can update my forecast, or no, that's not significant enough, I'm going to leave it the way it is. It's all automated. It's all kind of AI type automation, that kind of thing. As far as the radar, when you're seeing snow and it's not reaching the ground, that's where it gets into just knowing how weather works, because all of that, I know exactly what you're talking about. All of that snow was hundreds of feet up, but it was too dry at the surface that it wasn't reaching the ground. So if you're just looking at it, you say, oh, well, there's snow out there on the radar. When you know that added piece of information, you understand what the deal is. And so that's why I try to provide that added context to help people understand this is what you're seeing, but this is why that translates to this. Now, those apps also have what is called future radar. And that is a marketing term. It makes no sense, because weather radar shows what is happening now and in the past. Weather radar does not have a future component to it. what you're seeing is a model, right? So if you're watching the model, then they're not usually telling you which model you're seeing. And you're also, again, they're not really showing you the context of that model. There was one evening where I was in bed, relaxing, about to go to sleep, and my phone starts blowing up of people asking, "Hey, where's this storm coming from? There's a big storm coming in." And I'm going, "That's news to me." So I looked into it, and it was the Weather Channel app and the WAP, which, to let you know, it's the same thing. If you open your WAP, if you look at the bottom when you open it, you'll see the weather channels or the weather companies, same people, logo get covered up by their menu there. And so that will kind of tell you that this is the same, it's the same thing, just a different
Right.
layout and that kind of thing. They've purchased the license to use it and to put their branding on it. And so when it comes down to it, these apps, I mean, well, let me get back to the story. It showed this big storm coming through. I checked the app to see where this was coming from, and sure enough, it showed this this big storm coming out of like Wichita Falls, and this squall line just blows up out of nowhere. Just poof, it's there.
Mhm.
Goes through Dallas and that kind of thing. And I'm thinking, there's nothing to create this. And I think that there was possibly a outflow boundary somewhere that the computer looked at it and said, "Oh, hey, look, outflow boundary, boom," you know.
Mhm.
But there was nothing to actually support that happening. And I kept trying to tell people, look, this isn't going to happen. It's not. There's not the kind of atmospheric setup that you need for this. And sure enough, 30 minutes later or so, it disappeared, and we went on without incident through the rest of the night. But these apps can cause a lot of uproar, and especially, you're right, when they put snow in the forecast or something and that kind of thing, and I get it all the time, that the apps are saying this or that, and I get it too, that people all the time will send me screenshots of another page's forecast or another TV station's forecast, and I'm thinking, that's their forecast. I mean, it's not mine. I don't know what to
Mhm.
tell you. We don't all have a conference call and decide, well, I want to say this, you say this, and we'll, go from there. This is all what I'm putting my name to is what I determine for our area.
Yeah.
And so there's not this attempt for all of us to be on the same page. There's really not.
Right.
I mean, if anything, the TV stations probably compete with each other. I mean, you talk about the 14-day forecast, sometimes that's strictly there to be different from another TV station. But
Right.
when it comes down to it, there's, apps are going to say one thing and they have their calculus and that kind of thing. TV stations are going to say what they want to say. Other pages are going to say what they want to say. And what I'm putting out there is what I've put my name to. And I can't really speak to anybody else's methodology.
So one of the things that I respect about you so much, and that's why I watch you, and I put my family safety in your hands whenever we have weather like that. That's You're the one I'm listening to. And sometimes huddling inside the bathroom because something's happening. One thing that I respect is that you do not do sensationalism. You do not throw some crazy stuff out there and just let everybody sizzle and then come through with something. That's something you don't do. There's others online. There's plenty of people online that are doing weather and they're putting these crazy titles out or they're using these words. Talk to me about weather sensationalism and your thoughts on that.
So there's really two sources of it for different reasons, right? So on social media, we know that social media content goes, I mean, it's successful based on how many people share and like and comment. You're going to have people that's all they have, especially these people that they cover weather wherever it happens in the country. They don't have investment in a community or investment in one particular area like I do. And so they don't have those local partnerships that can help them be successful outside of just, hey, let me just make a bunch of money because I got a bunch of likes last week. And, I saw a post from another meteorologist the other day who said, who knew the key to success in meteorology and in weather reporting was big arrows? because you have a lot of these guys on YouTube. I'm sure you've seen them, right? Where it's like OMG and it has a big arrow pointing to some dramatic color on a map. And 9 times out of 10, it's not that big a deal, but it caught your eye, didn't it? It made you check it out, which is all they needed. And so there's a lot of that. And then on the news side, I mean, every meteorologist has a news director above them, right? And TV is ratings. Now, hopefully, if you've got a good team, you're not as dependent on that. And I can see sometimes that they're totally fine not doing that. And I prefer the guys that don't do that, because to me, again, it's just dishonest. If I think there's a reason to be excited, I'm probably going to tell you about it. But aside from that, there's just not big enough reason to scare people. And when I was a child, I was terrified of severe weather, right? And I have people that tell me all the time that they struggle with storm anxiety, with weather anxiety, and that they're very thankful that I don't go down that road of exploiting their fear for content and for attention. And I've built a model where I don't have to do that. And I've been told that that's a good model, so I'll stick with it. And I mean, we see it in every, the weather cat has to make his cameos here. But
I was gonna,
we see it in the cable news, right? It's all of them. They'll find the most obscure, inconsequential scandal to try to use to get attention. And I mean, sometimes I'm watching them going, I mean, what was it, CNN that was, called out for using the breaking news graphic too many times, because they literally used the breaking news graphic to talk about remembering something that happened like 200 years ago. I mean, it's just nuts. And then you have some of these other cable news channels that, they'll go to a press conference and they'll ask the most wild, outlandish questions specifically to get the question on the record. It doesn't really matter what the answer is. They just want the question because it works with whatever story they've had going. And I mean, it's just crazy. I worked for a newspaper one time and I was covering a story about a gentleman who was going to swim the Pacific Ocean, like swim across the Pacific Ocean. And we broke that story, but we broke that story, and eventually there were some roadblocks, but it did happen. But when I was updating my editor about that story, I told her that in my research and in my conversations with him, he had already swam across the Atlantic Ocean. And it's a charity thing. And I told her, apparently there was some point where there was an interview with Oprah and there was something said that ended up being controversial. And it was probably something about some really, niche statistic that he misquoted or something, something really inconsequential. And when I told her this controversy existed, she said, "Ooh, maybe that's the story." And I said, "No, it's not. That's not the story. We're not going to derail this entire story to go down some rabbit hole of some controversy that happened 20 years ago just because that might be the juicier gossip. I've been told and tempted to go down that road because it might get better attention. But that's just not something that I'm willing to do. And it causes problems because I'll have people all the time, well, so-and-so said this. What do you think? Right? Well, you're being negative and you're attacking people and all this kind of thing. Well, no, it's because I got 6 messages in the last hour asking about that thing. And so I'd rather just put it out there and try to answer the question that clearly a lot of people have and address it. It's what people are talking about. And so I'm not trying to, be negative or any of those kind of things. I'm just responding to the questions that are there, that are brought up, and have those conversations that matter, because whether it's good or not, and whether it's right or not, it works. And so it gets people talking, and that turns into the focus of the discussion that I can be having on the page any given day.
Well, I got 2 more questions to ask of you before I close out. And one of them is about, can you tell me one of your scariest moments when doing this, since you've been doing this, or what is one of those fears that you have when you're doing this?
So let me think. I guess it would probably be the tornado back in, it was the tornado that went through South Waxahachie, between Waxahachie and Forreston. It went across the highway, went across 35, across 77, and it caused some serious damage. And I know that area. I know that that area has a lot of manufactured homes. I know that it's an interstate where people are in their cars. It's at night. I mean, it was a terrible, terrible situation. So that's part of the challenge in this position, is trying to stay calm when you see how bad it could be. And, in that moment, I kind of let my emotions get involved. I said something like, in the name of all that is holy, take shelter. And I try not to sound like that, right? And that was earlier in the business, but I try not to sound that way because I don't want to sound like I'm afraid, because then people are really going to be afraid, right? I want to make sure that I'm calm and that I'm clear, because if I'm upset, then that turns other people upset, and they're less likely to really pay attention and think clearly about what they need to do to stay safe. And so that was probably the most challenging. The other time was the tornado that went through, I think it was 2019. I'm getting my dates mixed up here, but the tornado that went through Midlothian, and there was no tornado warning attached to it. I knew what I was looking at. I knew I saw it, but it was without the National Weather Service issuing a warning and without their input on it. I didn't feel like I had the confidence to use the T word. And you want to be careful with that, right? It's just like any other, I mean, we're talking about sensationalism. I'm trying not to hype this thing up and looking at that going, hey, I'm pretty sure I see a tornado coming out of this thing, but there's no warning issue. So I didn't feel like I had kind of the institutional backup to make that call. And so that experience taught me to just go with my gut. If they won't issue the warning and I see it there, I'm just going to have to run with it. And there's been a couple of situations like that. That was, one of those where there was a tornado going through Highland Park, Preston Hollow area up in Dallas. Mm-hmm. And I understand that's the population center. That's one of the most densely populated parts of our area. And I understand that. But at the same time, if you're going to cover our area too, we got to be able to do both at the same time. So it's those kind of situations where I'm pretty sure I see what I'm seeing, but the rest of the weather community may not necessarily be on board. And so I have to be the one to kind of jump out there and say, hey, I'm the only one calling this, but this is what I see.
Right. The question that I wanted to ask you, and this is something that even my daughter is seeing when we're watching you, is, does the cat know that you're doing the weather report and decides to do a cameo, or it's just one of those things? Because I've seen you, the cat just shows up, and right in the middle of you're talking about hooks and the cat just shows up. So does he know?
So it's really more of a, he knows that I'm not paying attention to him because I'm working kind of situation. Oh. He wants to be on camera because he knows that's where I am. And he hasn't been petted or scratched in a few minutes, so he's got to get his fix, and I'm just going to have to do it while I'm working. That's, I think, the driving motivation behind that for the weather cat. I mean, I've had him since he was born, and he's been stuck to my hip every day of his life. And so if I'm doing something, he's usually right next to me. So I think that it's just the fact that I'm working and not paying attention to him that makes him a little jealous. So he needs to insert himself into the situation and get his few minutes of attention. I just kind of have to deal with doing it. I mean, he's been all over this desk at the time of this interview, and here he comes again. Why? I don't know why this is important. You're supposed to be petting me. that's the calculus, the mindset that's going on there.
That's what's going on with the cat. On my show, I give the last word, but before I do, I wanted to thank you so much for coming on the show again. Every time you come on, I learn a little something more about weather, because I find it fascinating, but I have no idea how it works. And you put it in words that even I can understand. But I'm gonna go ahead and shut up and give you the mic.
DV, I really appreciate what you do. And both of us, try to get through the noise and just talk about things the way they are. Try to get information to the public. And I really appreciate the work that you do, whether you're talking to public officials or authors, or just, people that have something to share that can be beneficial to your audience. And that's always a great thing. And the fact that you try to just be straightforward with it is wonderful. And it's getting harder to do in the weather world, because we are slowly but surely being eaten up by the hype monster. And so it's getting to the point now where if you're straightforward and simple, people kind of look at you and see you're boring. But the thing is that if we're informing people, it should be neutral. It's just a reality of what's going on. And so, it really shouldn't be something that we depend on for entertainment. If your weather reporting is not entertaining enough for you, you're probably not looking for information, right? And there's a lot of news sources and these kind of things that they focus on being entertaining and informative, but I can tell you that it's always going to lean towards entertaining because that's what sells. That's
Yeah.
what's successful and gets the ratings. And so I appreciate that there's somebody else like you in our area that's trying to do that. But folks, make sure you're following me on South Metro Weather. We had the link there, southmetroweather.com. I'm on all the social media sources, X and Facebook and YouTube and Instagram and all these. Sponsor me. I tell them there might be times where the weather's not really doing much, but when it's doing something, we're staying busy. And so sometimes the summer is the toughest season to do that. But I've worked the last couple of seasons on making sure that we stay relevant. We're keeping that information going because regardless of what the weather's doing right now, there's always something that we need to be keeping people aware of. There's always the planners out there that need to know what's happening and need to know how to plan by it. So that's why we do what we do.
Support your local folks. We do this on shoestring budgets, and especially our sponsors. I mean, go and check them out. They're all local. They're all doing stuff for the community. Yep. And support them. It helps us keep doing what we do. Thank you so much again for coming on. Can you stick on after the show real quick?
Yes, sir.